Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our discussion on this very important topic of remediating cyber risk. I'm Simon Goldstein. I'm a senior manager with Accenture Security Practice, and I'm here today to help moderate this discussion with Lalit Ahluwalia, a member of our leadership group for Accenture Security. This is going to be an open session. We're going to be going back and forth, but certainly everyone is free to ask questions throughout the session. Please don't be shy. We are accustomed to the people that we work with, our clients and our customers, being open and candid with us. So we're looking forward to a lively discussion here today. Lalit?
Hey, thank you, Simon. Appreciate it. First of all, thank you for all coming and participating. Do I hear a little bit echo? Maybe a lot. Is that any better? All right, great. So my name is Lalit Ahluwalia. As Simon said, I lead our public sector and higher ed security practice for North America for Accenture. I'm pretty sure some of the folks are familiar with the work Accenture is doing in the state of California itself. We have our folks supporting some of the large programs here, including your insurance exchange, the Cal HERES. We also have another program called Fiscal, for your financial information system, your eligibility system. So there's a lot of different programs that Accenture is supporting within the state of California. And I'll probably say a lot of those programs have a full-blown security programs inbuilt into that. And we have teams of anywhere ranging from 10 to 20 people supporting those things. And the reason why I'm saying that is because what I really want to make sure that happens is the relevance of this topic to the way we're doing things, not just within here in California. I'll probably be sharing some of the experiences, some of the areas that we have dealt with this very important topic of remediating cyber risk out there. And in my capacity, I also get to kind of oversee some of our larger programs across the board within North America, whether it's Ohio, so the Michigans, Floridas, or New Yorks, and California, of course. The advantage I get is by working with so many teams and seasoned professionals like yourself is not just contribute but also learn from those experiences. Because I'm pretty sure everyone who's in the room, we have opportunities to learn from like other areas, what they're doing better or effectively than what we are not doing today. And that's going to be the focus for this topic today. Okay.
Lalit, before we get started, why remediating cyber risk? Why is this an important topic? Why do we have to discuss this morning?
Oh, that's a great question, Simon. So if I were to ask this audience sitting in the room here, how many of you really deal with the day-to-day identification of incidents and just supporting that, or trying to figure out your day-to-day work that you do for the cyber risk? Probably that's where the most of the focus is for the folks. Versus, how do I really managing my risk, cyber risk? Am I really doing this effectively and efficiently? That really becomes a second thought, because the first thing that you have to do is get your compliance matrices out of the way. Oh, am I HIPAA compliant? Am I 1075 IRS compliant? Am I NIST and FISMA compliant? And that becomes what is called a false sense of accomplishment. Oh, I got my compliance checklist done. The question I'll ask back to the audience is, if the compliance checklist was the only thing that was the success metrics, then most of the breaches that you've seen with the high-profile retail accounts or media, they all are compliance checklists signed, whether PCI compliant, whether SOX compliant and stuff, but they still ended up having those breaches out there. So what that really means? That means that your focus has to be not just doing some risk assessments out there, not just identifying the risks, but able to better remediate those risks, because that's where the end goal or the objective is. And I'm pretty sure you all run into the same issues that I see across the board. Limited skills, limited budget, limited hours and everything else. But then how do I maximize the things that I have to better remediate the risk? And that's what I want to cover.
Well, that's great, Lalit, but who really needs to understand this? Who really needs to participate in this kind of discussion? Is this a discussion primarily focused for senior leadership in an agency or an organization? Is this for the people who are on the ground in operations, in technology, actually engaging in doing the work? Is it for middle management? Who needs to pay attention to remediating cyber risk?
Well, the short answer is it impacts everyone from top to bottom. Of course, you've seen with this, some of the high-profile breaches, the top executive leadership is now very aware of what the risks are. But truly, if I really ask the question, is the middle management to the people who do this day-to-day basis. Because if they are able to effectively do this work, they will be able to better show how they can really improve this exposure and remediate the risk. So to me, this impacts everyone in the organization, but more so your middle management, your kind of day-to-day folks who are really, kind of really helping with this kind of cyber risk management, right? So with that though, let me get into the topic because that's really important, right? We can talk and discuss these things day long, but I want to kind of leave the session today after we're done with some of the thought-provoking things and maybe some of the lessons learned that we have, starting with what is risk remediation, right? And let me start with a simple analogy here. So imagine there's a military post out there which is well guarded with all the barriers and stuff. You got all the electric wires around the fences, and you got soldiers manning it all 24 hours. Let's say one fine day, one of the soldiers during his routine check find there's a hole in this perimeter or within the perimeter. And the only thing that they really do, because they want to contain that, just go fill in the hole and do nothing and just say, okay, problem taken care of. Isn't that something which we truly run into our day-to-day lives here in cyber risk space? Because what you really do is, let me run some scans, find out vulnerabilities, put the patches, and we're done. Our job is done here. Or put my compliance checklist, oh, this control exists in some form, and we're good to go. Isn't that the typical form? That's what we call as fixing the vulnerabilities. That's not your risk remediation. If I were to expand on that analogy, let's say the hole was found, but somebody then started talking about, okay, how did that happen? Is there potential or possibility for similar holes elsewhere too? Let me go do the analysis. Of course, tactically you have to plug the hole so you don't have further damage, but this process doesn't stop there. Let me do the evaluation. What happened to begin with? How big is the hole? When was that dug? Can I analyze through okay, was this process in making or something that happened? With some of the breaches that, of course, you guys seen with, high-profile ones where the data kept changing and fluxing. Oh, we only lost 100,000 records. Oh, no, now it's 200,000 and stuff. That was really the reason, because there is really not a true risk remediation. So what is risk remediation process, right? When we talk about risk remediation, it all starts with the facilitation and the tracking, and truly understanding and analyzing the risk. When you look at any vulnerability, you have to start quantifying that vulnerability along with what's the threat landscape, how does it really tie to the threat landscape? What's the total risk associated with that, what happened out there? And then be able to dig into the different areas, whether it's just the threat and vulnerabilities, it's your configuration management databases out there, processes, people. You have to start quantifying and analyzing in all the aspects because your threat vector is no more contained around technology. It could very well be internal or external. It could very well be missing technology components, could be missing process components, it could be missing skills. You have to analyze those things in a true risk remediation format. And the folks who are also very familiar with the compliance side of the house and look like the NIST frameworks and stuff, you probably see those controls around security risk impact analysis. So in a very simple words, whenever you do a risk remediation, you have to do a security risk impact analysis associated with any finding or any vulnerabilities out there, which should lead to, if you're doing that process properly, a true root cause analysis, because now you understand what actually really caused this vulnerability to come. So if I run a scan and I find 10 vulnerabilities, our first point of attack is, okay, how do I fix the vulnerability? What about your first point of attack was, what caused the first vulnerability to be there? Is it because the software vendor did not provide us the patch and there was a lacking there? Or was something that we configured and that kind of caused to bring this vulnerability? And I'm just getting a very simplistic example of a technology vulnerability. But there could be people or the process where my administrator who manages all my access within my environment is not available for 1 week. Means somebody else is kind of really filling in a slot. Does this person understand the process is fully, how to grant access, how to manage access, and maybe your review cycles are due as well? Do they do the proper handshake? Why would that not be a vulnerability? And how we not evaluate the proper risk around that, right? That's another example.
So question, what if you cannot get to that root cause? Then how can you remediate something when you cannot find that root cause?
Great question. How many times, if I were to ask, just a simple poll, how many people feel they have all the resources in-house to do a full-blown root cause analysis? Answer is not. You never get to do a full root cause analysis. I think question really comes, that's why we always keep emphasizing on the risk-based approach. Have I evaluated the risk enough or vulnerability enough to understand the risk at least, at a minimum, so that I can quantify how much damage can I endure? Because your level of effort you will get into to do a full root cause analysis will depend on how much risk you're enduring, right? And that kind of helps you prioritize certain things, because public sector specifically, you don't have arms and bodies, let's be honest, right, to really do this full on. We hardly even get to a day-to-day job to kind of do similar things and not be able to kind of really do other functions out there. But where it really gets missed is where like your prioritization becomes, or your success matrix becomes, okay, have I met my compliance package submitted? That's my security goal. No, that's not your security goal. Security goal is my security risk posture not perfect? Is it good enough against the risk that I can endure? Right? But there's no really good answer to what you're asking, right? Where, yes, it's just a matter of like bringing all the stakeholders, which is actually the next one, which is maturing the efficiency and capacity. How many of these folks in the room just rely on the technology specialists in-house to fix those vulnerabilities? How many of you believe that security is just an IT function? Maybe you don't believe it's an IT function, but how many times you run into the issue where business will come, hey, can you go and fix the security issue? And the question you should be asking, hey business, isn't that your part of responsibility too, to help me understand this? Like access review, how can I as a security specialist tell you who need to have what access? Why would they not be part of your access reviews? Right? That's what we call as that efficiencies and stuff. How do you kind of leverage your larger pool? You don't need to have 10 specialists, security specialists doing the work. No. What you really need to have that model being drafted and in place where everybody understands where they can contribute for effective risk management. And probably, vulnerability intrusion process, I'm pretty sure you all are familiarized with, but adjusting your risk model and resource allocation is the point I'm trying to drive. You will never, ever, and this is not true just for the public sector in general, across the different industries, you'll never get enough bodies to kind of really do what you kind of see in today's digital disruption space. Security, because thanks to all the digital disruption, no boundaries with where your data is, you cannot just contain all that. But what you can do is effectively manage using the workforce you have between your business and the technology groups, also through your processes, because some of those processes could be automated now versus what you're doing on a day-to-day basis as manually. Some of those could still be semi-automated depending on how much technology investment you make. And why not outsource some of that too? Because that's not something you are equipped to do. Very common example of that is ongoing security information and event management. You cannot have enough people in-house to kind of really just monitor the security incidents on a day-to-day basis, period. And even if you put a person dedicated 24 hours, eyes on the glass, that's not going to be effective use of that person. You're going to have automated technologies, maybe in some ways outsourced, where it's a shared service model, get you the results that you're looking for, because the outcome is what you should be interested in, not how it's being done and who's done, because that's something that you already model into your approach. So, with that said, so that's great. What is risk remediation? What it yields to? What are the enablers for that? Right? And some of the enablers I'm pretty sure you're familiar with, but I'm going to start summarizing those. The first and foremost, what's your overall governance and oversight out there? Right? Which is, does your management understand what the security risk landscape looks like and who's responsible for what? I've been to number of states, number of agencies ranging from Department of Health and Human Services to state ITs to Department of Transportations. I'll tell you, most of the responsibilities are very distributed in nature, and one of the common findings is oh, I know there's some group responsible for this, but I'm only responsible for this. Okay, if that siloed approach exists, there is really not a governance structure exists. And security, unfortunately, cannot operate that way. That's the reality. This is not like your mainframe days when somebody was just watching the screens, everything is locked, and only people get access to this, like, through those mainframe screens. No, you're already kind of way past that stage, and now you're dealing with all those digital areas, IoTs, cloud, social, mobile. It's just expanding every day, and you got to kind of like work and figure out what's my governance model going to look like, which leads to another one when we talk about the example of access review and business helping the IT or the technology folks out. What's the common lingo? Does the business understand what a security risk is? Or you're going to talk to them about, oh, I have a SQL injection. And the business say, what? Because they really don't understand what SQL injection can lead to from their business application perspective. Or you throw like cross-site scripting, out there, or like all the technical lingo, they don't understand. And the same with technology, when they talk to the business might say, oh, I might have my child support cases and case management at risk because of this. And the technology is, what? How does it matter to me? Because there is really not an understanding of how the risk really spans from business to technologies out there. And that's really the taxonomies and the methods in play. Skills and capabilities, this goes beyond saying, even in the consulting firms, I can tell you we struggle sometimes to keep our workforce up to date with the latest and the greatest out there. We struggle with even having enough manpower. So for the organizations which are like commercially built, like some of the big banks out there, or some of the biggest airlines and stuff, they're struggling with having a skilled workforce. Public sector, which unfortunately is not one of the biggest paymasters, for them to kind of really keep that talent in-house is even more difficult. And more importantly, because you have such a shortage of skill, like man workforce, how do you keep people trained and motivated enough to be cross-trained is even bigger challenge. So how do we figure that equation out is another big challenge. But then the other piece which is like completely missing is there might be different areas that you have, like your assets. I probably can count right now on my fingertips many clients that have software A put on a shelf because they bought it 2 years back, they got funded, but they don't know what to do with that software. If that is something that you see, great, then you probably know what I'm saying. If you tell me, no, you have not seen that happen in your organizations, I'll be surprised, because that's a very common thing that we see across the board. And it's not that because they don't want to make use of it. Of course, there's a shortage of the workforce and skills and stuff. But more importantly, organizations don't even know what they can use it for. They bought it because it was funded. They bought it because, yes, it does something. But what exactly can it do in what capacity is not well understood, right? So bringing your processes, technologies, like people all together and combining all these factors is what we call as enablers for effective risk remediation out there. And I'm going to pause here because we kind of covered a very important topic, at least defining what a risk remediation is and what makes up a good risk remediation.
Well, I've got a question. I mean, we've got a cybersecurity environment that obviously has become much more complex. So how does that threat landscape impact risk remediation?
If I look at the threat landscape today, and how many of you have already seen the Democratic, Republican, and all those hackings going on? Like, look at the use cases, today's use cases. This is no longer a use case about, let me hack into your system and get some data out. Now, there's like focused cyber warfare use cases. They're motivated hacktivists who try to prove or make a point on some ways, and some are just doing just for the sake of doing it. But I want to prove my point. I did this because you're not doing this in my social. If you look at that, and then also look at where it has spanned to, it's no longer limited to corporates. You have sports franchises getting hacked. You would think, like, why are they getting hacked, right? And how are they able to hack this? What's motivation there? There's enough motivation out there. There's enough sophisticated tools out there. That's going to really change the whole gimmick of your cyber risk landscape, because now the question comes, how do I even understand what risk do I have? Is it just protecting my data in its entirety, or could there be different fraudulent cases? For example, child support is a great example. Could somebody use or leverage some of the welfare benefits in some ways? Is that their goal? And they're trying to do something fraudulent in my system. It's not about the confidentiality anymore, it could be integrity. Or it could be like, okay, now I have a citizen-based service being made, which is out there, very successful, and somebody else shut it down. Means availability goes out of fulfillment, and that brings a bad rapport or name to the state. So there are different motivations now. So what it really does is it kind of complicates the risk definition now. And without understanding your risk, when it's made more complex, risk remediation itself becomes more complex. Which leads to the second piece, which is now I cannot operate in my silos. Because within IT itself, you have silos. And not even saying that you even talking to business. You have to talk to the business to understand what the risks are. And that's been one of the common issues, or at least the gaps that we have seen. So without really creating those integration points, your risk remediation even becomes more complex. That's what the threat landscape today has done to the modern day risk remediation processes. Any questions, reaction from the audience on the first part that we covered so far here? Okay. So with that, so that's great. We know what risk remediation process is. We kind of talked about what the enablers for a risk remediation process are. Let's talk about hey, how the risk remediation works today in today's world. On the right hand side, I'm pretty sure this is a very common view of what most of you see in your IT landscape out there. You have different security capabilities, like a group that is doing access control or access management. You have a group that is doing incident management. Another group, probably focusing on the compliance and security and risk governance and stuff. Somebody doing probably some kind of database security or the data loss prevention and stuff, right? But if I were to ask you a question, is that a one single cohesive group? Answer is no. There are folks doing this responsibility in some silo, and then the second question probably comes to mind is, okay, does group A needs to feed into group B to be making more effective? Probably everybody say answer is yes. Is it happening? No. Okay, so you agree that okay, this needs to happen, but it's not happening, then what is lacking? Because ultimately, your driver in the public sector, at least in my experience, what I've seen is still your compliance. Compliance drives a lot of things, which I think rightfully so, because without compliance, nobody was doing anything to begin with. So compliance really gave you like a first step towards, okay, something to refer and something to put in place. But now is a transitional stage where you have to move beyond that, not just do the compliance piece, but also based on the risks that you identified and assessments you've done, you got to convert into an effective cyber risk remediation process. So all the silos that you see with the business continuity, how many of you have business continuity as a function? Okay, not all, some of them. But mostly the business continuity when I go to see is more on disaster recovery. Hey, can I bring my application up and running in an alternate place? Or maybe some processes, okay, my application or system goes down, I have an alternate ways to run my business still. But not many have a seasoned or structured and mature business continuity. That's something that was something in the last 3-4 years has been brought to forefront, and a lot of organizations are doing quite a bit of work in that space. But the whole view here is really about showing how your security capabilities today are clubbed. And you need to have those foundational capabilities. But the question is, if you look at this today, your threat agents, maybe your earlier threat agents was probably only some level of hacking from the external side that you were focused, but look at your threat agents now. The national states, like Russia, China, Middle East, trying to bring your federal agencies and those websites down and stealing data. Your organized crime out there in different forms. Activists, who are trying to make a social case. How many times you saw, hey, because the state haven't done this, I'm going to bring your services down because this is not what I feel is the right thing to do. And there's really nothing you can do. And there are a number of examples in just last 1 year alone that we've seen. Competitors. Of course, the public sector unfortunately doesn't have much of, or fortunately doesn't have a lot of competitors because you're not in a money-making business. But for the commercial, that is very true. Competitors really do different things. You can really bring your IPs or steal your IPs and other things like GEs and that kind of organizations struggle with that all the time. Which really talks about how this whole process really works. Without really getting into the details, where the hacking community has become very smart about doing things is, one, really giving a false sense of nothing happened, and also not just leave things open-ended, close the loop. So if you look at from the start to end with a silent egress, they're basically doing all the damage, but then when they leave the whole thing, they can't really patch up everything too. So you never even found that something happened, but damage has already happened. I'm pretty sure everybody's now finding 2014's Yahoo breach, 2014, and we are in 2016. Oh, change your passwords now. Okay, what? So 2 years later, I'm going to change my passwords for what again? Because what if damage would have happened, it's already happened. It's already done, unfortunately. And that's a common reality. It's not just one-off instance. In many cases, I'll probably say most of the organizations, there are only two kinds of organizations. One, that have been breached and know about it. The ones that have been breached and do not know about it. If you think there's an organization that has never been breached, probably yes, notionally yes, but you have to assume the worst case scenario, and that's how you need to go. But again, do not go with just the compliance mindset, go with the risk remediation, understanding what your risks are, because in our day-to-day lives too, we take some of the risks, right? When I have to run to a school to get my kid and I'm getting late, I'll start driving fast. I know, totally understand I'm like maybe taking a little bit extra risk, but I know what's driving me. But I will not go beyond certain limit either, even though I'm driving fast. So we do take risks in different, but understanding what the risk is very important for us. And then, I'm pretty sure a lot of people are familiar with this one. Even though our Accenture's Cybersecurity Framework is based on the NIST Cybersecurity Framework for critical infrastructure, this is what really tunes here. The reason why NIST Cybersecurity Framework has been formulated is exactly, kind of show you are using all the control frameworks, which is NIST 853, Ref 4, Ref 3, whichever you've been using. That's great. But how do you apply that controls in a more meaningful and effective way? Just the sequence, if you look at, you have to focus on identification of the vulnerabilities. Then you need to go to protection mechanisms. Then you go to detection, like actively be able to detect whether your SIM tools or intrusion detection tools and everything, effectively doing that. And then respond and recover. The controls that you've been implementing in silos now needs to come all in together. And before even you can start doing the process, look at your foundational capabilities. How many of you know what your total set of IT assets are? What data is at risk? How many servers are standing on the network, whereas not sitting on servers? How many mobile devices you have which are accessing your data, which is not even connected to your network? How do you even know what data is going out of the premises altogether? Knowing your foundational things is important before you can start now, okay, let me now identify my things that are happening in my environment. And then in order to do this identification, the controls are still driven off what you have seen. But what it really does, it can really starts applying you, how do I better manage and invest into different areas? Because your identification might be robust, but your protection might not be at par. Or your protection might be at par, but how you respond and recover, like your incident response processes and everything else, the patch management and other things, might not be at par. So it helps kind of prioritize, but also help you bring things together. Now you cannot work in silo because every group has to talk to and do a handshake with each other. That's how you should start looking at the NIST Cybersecurity Framework, because I get asked this question very often when we see different requests come out. Hey, I want to do an assessment. Which framework should I use, NIST 853 or NIST Cybersecurity Risk Framework? I'm like, okay, so what do you think what the difference is? There's not a difference. The underlying framework for even this piece is your NIST 853 controls, but how you kind of lay them and how you approach them is what the difference is. And this is just an attempt by those folks who have enough experience to kind of help you do it in a more effective and efficient way, which is a theme that we've been talking about, effective risk remediation. In there. So I'm going to pause here, right? Because what we're really covering is our security capabilities matrix and talking about what the new model should look like, obviously driven of the new threats and stuff.
I have a question, Lalit. How do you migrate from traditional capabilities model to the one addressing to the cybersecurity remediation?
So, no, that's a great question there. If you really look at your current capabilities model, right, what you need to have in place, because you still have to have capabilities. That still is a foundational thing. The question is identification of that stakeholder group, just like how you're doing IT consolidation, and I'm sure many organizations are doing it. The reason why you're doing it is because there's a lot of benefit in bringing infrastructure, have common set of services, leverage those things, treat those set of security services the same way. What I call as start with a consolidation exercise, means identify and consolidate. Once you've done that, now you know which stakeholder groups are responsible for which area. Let them come. I would call it do a tabletop exercise. Let them talk about what ties to another thing. Just like how you do a disaster recovery or people and process test exercise, do that exercise. Bring all the areas together, the gamut, map it back to this governance framework or at least this capability maturity model and identify where your gaps are. And you might find out, oh, I'm really weak in identification because I'm not really doing a good job there. And I might have a good protection layer, that's fine. That's the first step in this process, to really bring that together. Now, the good news is, I'm hoping that a lot of things are still happening because I've seen many organizations that still do not have a good identity access management processes or technologies or security information event management processes. How many of you don't even have a threat and vulnerability testing processes or a framework? I've seen many public sector organizations that don't have even a good threat and vulnerability testing program of anything else. Right? So bringing all those things together and understanding who plays what role and do a handshake is the first step in the process. The second step, which is very important, if you haven't already started doing it, you need to sit with your business stakeholders, and business stakeholders need to sit with you to understand what your risk landscape looks like and establish that common taxonomy. Without that, whatever you're going to do is only going to scrape the surface, nothing else. You'll probably be good at just technology piece, but your process and other pieces will have a big gaps out there, or huge gaps, and that will lead to the exposure that you have. So that's what you're going to really start doing. The third piece is which once you can really got your taxonomies in place, you got your capabilities identified, is the consolidation exercise itself. Really investing or prioritizing, come with a good strategy of which one things I want to uplift, and nothing's going to happen in a day or two or a month or two. So you got to have a good strategy and plan, which with a strong governance structure, you got to keep updating as well along the way. Don't assume that it's hard and static. You have to every month or every quarter, go to revisit that too. But at least follow that direction, but have leadership support around it. Because without leadership support, or without funding, without skills, you can only go so far. But in order to get that business case, you have to talk to business, you have to get a consolidation, show them what your solution is, not the problem. You can always go with the problem in hand. Show them what the solution you kind of come up with and get their buy-in on that one. So, and I know we're kind of really running a little bit late, and so I'm going to just quickly go to the next couple slides and open up for Q&A here. So the next question is, okay, is this the kind of the secret sauce for things happen? What if I do this? Am I good to go? The answer is no. The reality is we're dealing with the landscape which is constantly changing. So when you don't even have a fixed target, how you can really solve a problem? But the beauty of the framework is it has to be fluid as well. So when you look at the total modern day technology, how many of you are struggling with, hey, I want to move to the cloud, but I don't know what my cloud security solution is going to look like? I have my mobile users and I want to enable mobile, but I don't know how to can really best make sure that the mobile users are secure as well, right? And on top of that now IoTs, the digital, add all those things to the mix. You're saying, okay, do even I control my data anymore? Where is my data? And then the next phase which comes, which even astonishes everyone, is when you put that cloud service providers and you look at your contracts, there's nothing about security in there. So you basically give away all the assets and data without really mentioning or putting some responsibility in expected SLAs, means hey, this is what I'm expecting out of the services from you. That kind of makes it even more complicated. Now, if you have that process we talked about, which aligns to the cybersecurity framework and the critical infrastructure safeguarding, a lot of those things will be part of the process because anytime you introduce anything in the mix, whether mobile or whether the social aspects to it, you will probably be doing a security impact analysis and making sure that the right controls have been put in place before these things were rolled out. Otherwise, the business will take a lead because they have to. The business still has to operate. They will just take a lead and then move ahead without even involving the security specialists or the IT specialists in the mix, right? So it's interconnected, but understanding the challenges are you're not working in the contained boundaries anymore. You have a constantly moving target, and you have lack of support, lack of business integration. Those are, to me, the biggest challenges that kind of really are not the technology. I can tell you that much. Technology is the easiest piece to solve here. Once you know the problem, like getting technology and moving is a solution, but that's where the biggest focus has been, or getting the compliance checklist. But shift the mindset to other important things is where the biggest challenge will come. And this problem, nothing is rocket science here, but it requires resources, it requires the right skills, but also a good plan. That's what you need to kind of really succeed in here. And we've given some examples here if you really look at, like from the end device perspective, how you can do configuration management, or have a good robust vulnerability management processes for some of the things. That's kind of really some of the examples of some of the areas, but you have to evaluate every single area and give it a good merit. And again, don't expect a perfect security posture. If you're going to go with the mindset, you will fail, everyone. But if you go with the mindset of, okay, I know what my risk what's my risk appetite is, and what I can do, that's when you're going to be successful. And with that said, I will also leave with this one. Do not go with the risk management or risk remediation processes with the CMMI maturity capabilities mindset. Evaluate your security program effectiveness on the scale of effective risk management. So people who are familiar with the CMMI models and stuff, initial, ad hoc, manage, repeatable and stuff. This is like if you have a best practice geared risk management, you are pretty much green because you're doing it effectively, proactively, diligent. Yes, you have a good handle on those things. Acceptable, okay, this is good enough. I know how I manage my risk. There might be some, but it's still acceptable. But when you start going to yellow and the red, that's when you know that you're not really managing your risk. Everything else flows into that. That's the kind of like capability mature. This is what, when you talk about CRO, which is Chief Risk Officers versus the Chief CIOs and stuff, why that is coming, that terminology, the reason is this, because everybody wants to evaluate against a risk. Business today that you operate in today's world is about a risk. How much risk you can accept and not accept. So, with that, I don't want to spend more time on the presentation, but I want to open for the Q&A and see the questions in the audience. Okay.
Anyone?
I'm pretty sure you guys deal with this day out, and surprised that you don't have any questions or real life scenarios where you deal with.
I have a question, Lalit. When you define a situation at risk, what would be the first step you would take based on this model?
I think that what we discussed earlier, right? The first thing that you will take is this known with all the required business stakeholders, and who are the business stakeholders? Do you have a good answer to that? Because when you identify the risk, you do not know what the impact of the risk is. And involving all the right parties is the first step in the process. Once that has been done, then comes the two views, which is the tactical and the strategic. With the analogy of the military post setup, you have to obviously tactically plug the hole, means manage the risk. But if that's the only goal, you're going to miss the strategic aspect, which is what are the other places this risk has been in play. I can tell you a lot of organizations today, they're kind of really changing the game plan. So basically, earlier it used to be more reactive, means, okay, I'm kind of reactively managing all those things. Now the organizations come and ask for, how can I proactively attack my own environment and see what my risks are? But beyond even that, what the organizations have started doing, because they've accepted that they will be at risk, they've created what we call as honeypots, or like the dummy sites, where they kind of project, okay, this is where my assets are, which is not truly where the assets are. The assets are somewhere else. But they want to do is kind of mimic the pattern, because attackers are still going to come. They want them to come. They start evaluating strategically, okay, what they can do or not do, and then start fixing those things. Because really, that's not where your true assets are, but you're kind of projecting as my assets are here. So there are different techniques and the shift in mindset of how the things are being approached in today's market.
So, as kind of a last question for you, maybe a last question, what single recommendation would you make to the audience as to how they should approach, or what they should do to enable cybersecurity practices within their organizations?
I think first and foremost, create a risk management culture in your organization. And that's highly paramount. As I said earlier, how many of you talk to the business You cannot be successful in today's world without really engaging the business stakeholders. You can always talk about how short I am with the resources, but trust me, once you start engaging business and other parties, you'll be surprised how much shareholding or how much sharing of your practices and procedures can be done in-house. The biggest advantage of that activity is going to be you will truly understand the risk from the true end-to-end perspective, not just from the IT perspective. When you talk about SQL injection, you know that okay, SQL injection can do this damage to your technical or component. Well, you really don't know what SQL injection can now help or do a damage from the business perspective. When you totally understand or truly understand, then you know where all and what all you have to be applying there. So really, mitigate that gap. If you really don't have a strong governance practices, go and establish that, because effective risk remediation, what we discussed, cannot exist without a good, effective governance structure. And what I'm really telling you here is not because you have lack of business stakeholder engagement. Even within your IT organization, you are still operating as siloed groups. Bringing them together into a single cohesive umbrella, it doesn't mean that you have to have like a designated person to make that happen. As a group itself, you need to start integrating and understanding what each group does, how one feeds to another. Those are the things that I think the group, as a group, you all need to start doing. And of course, look at your threats. Everything should be like identified. What are the common threats applicable to your environment? And what is at risk based on those threats? Have an inventory of that, inventory of your IT assets along with that and the business assets, and map it. Which threat apply to which asset? So that way now that checklist is in front of everyone and they're proactively identifying and working on those.
Great, great. So is this something organizations really need to do on their own? Is there a role for consulting organizations to help, and if so, how?
I think the question will be for the audience, right? How many of you feel like with the constantly changing threat landscape, if you're up to date in terms of what's happening? The answer probably will be no, because a lot of people are dealing with their day-to-day issues out there. And that's the reality. So the short answer is yes, because you have to take some external help. But where we miss the point is that I'm taking that this third-party help and they will help me fix all this. No. The mindset should be we're bringing, because we don't have those resources in-house or skills in-house, but once you bring them, your pattern should be, okay, they come, they help, but they transition, and they can really transition to your workforce. And that could be an opportunity for even you to evaluate, oh, this is not something we can do because this is not in our core area. That's fine. That could be then outsourced in a more effective way. But many times, some of those things, you basically learn. You don't have to create in-house. Do not reinvent the wheel, because there are other consulting firms or whatever, like we're working hard to kind of come up with those frameworks. They can help you accelerate those things and put in place. That's really truly the biggest advantage of them coming. Otherwise, you're going to spend 6 months doing something, but that 6 months that technology is obsolete or that risk is not even relevant. It has changed the form and shape. So you basically, again, chasing and behind the ball curve out there. So that's really what the biggest advantage for having external parties to come and help out.
Great, great. Thank you very much, Lalit. Any other last questions from the audience? I believe it will be available through the PSP website, yes.
Yeah.
Well, with that, thank you all very much for coming today. That concludes our presentation.